I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart.
When we talk about feminism in the modern age, we are accustomed to pointing the finger at a mythological figure that attacks the modern feminists in every aspect. This figure being the patriarchy. While this will not be a discussion on the idea of a patriarchal society today, it's important that we look upon the society of past generations and take note of the great strides we've taken to distance ourselves from it. While it will appear ironic for many, it's important for us to look at the portrayals of men across media and how these portrayals contributed towards or worked against the idea of the ideal man. With an idea of what should be the ideal man during two specific time periods, we gain a clear picture of how these changes bring us towards today and even the leftover issues from these changes and additions. Knowing this, it is important for us to note that in this video we will be comparing the greatest generation, people born between 1920 and 1930, and the baby boomers, people generally born between 1946 and 1955. Please keep in mind that these years are not completely solid and can be argued over, as is with any period of time in history. While the idea of masculinity was clear and relatively set in stone for the greatest generation, baby boomers rejected and converted the sexist undertones of the media and what it means to be a man to become more integrated with the social movements of the 60s and 70s, such as the free love movement, into their ideal of masculinity.
I love you too much.
During the height of the Great Depression and even veering into World War II, which was when members of the greatest generation would have been in their late teens or already fully developed adults, the overall sentiment was quite somber. The United States had just fallen into one of the greatest economic collapses that it had ever witnessed, and this of course was going to contribute to the culture of the time period in almost every aspect of life. The hit to the personal finances and quality of life that many women would face had meant that many were unable to provide for their newly developed families. And as Alan Brinkley in one lecture stated, the response of these men, quote, "The humiliation, the attempt to hide the shame, the depression was often hard to see. They knew there was suffering, they knew there were unemployed people, poor people, starving people, but they seldom saw them." End quote. Many men had felt emasculated and were in desperate need to reaffirm their masculinity, not just for the sake of their pride, but so too for their mental health, in whatever viable way possible. It may not just be a coincidence that the movies of the 1930s tended to stray from facing the issues of the time and instead focused on helping people find an escape from reality, with movies like The Wizard of Oz, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and even just the lighthearted tone of Chaplin films like Modern Times, which poked fun at the working class culture of the time. Perhaps the fact that the president that led us out of this depression, FDR, who was physically disabled, was never to be photographed exiting his vehicle as for fear that he may appear weak was also just a coincidence and a fun prank played on the people for giggles. The men of the time, even after the depression, needed to reaffirm themselves in a society, and in media often spoke about women in slightly demeaning or patronizing ways. Take a look at this clip from the official trailer for the critically acclaimed movie Citizen Kane.
Speaking of attractions, well, the chorus girls are certainly an attraction, but frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we're just showing you the chorus girls for purposes of ballyhoo. It's pretty nice ballyhoo. But here's some of our real Mercury people. This is the first time you've seen most of them on the screen.
Did you notice what just happened? In this clip, the narrator chooses to poke fun and mention that this trailer only features the chorus girls to be eye candy, nothing less and nothing more, which we can slightly tolerate in the context of the time period. However, even Walt Disney managed to let out some pretty sexist remark in trailers.
And Happy here with the beaming smile, and old Sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater, and last but not least is Dopey.
These kind of remarks that appeared every now and again contended that men were almost the only important people in the cinematic world, and that in fact women served little purpose to them. Once the US finally entered World War II, an even stronger sense of what it meant to be a man was introduced. As the war effort had gone into full patriotic steam, men who showed qualities of bravery and an eagerness to both serve their country and fight for the sake of fighting were upheld as the golden standard. Take for instance Captain America, a superhero introduced in 1941, the same year we had entered the war. Wearing the American flag as protection for his body and punching a Hitler in the face perfectly embodied the need for a patriotic macho in society. After World War II had finished, the baby boomers had come into existence and were prepared to shake up the world in intense ways. Baby boomers had been born into a world where the United States was not only a power of the world, but rather the superpower of the world. Baby boomers had known the world in a way that was both empowering and scary, as the US was constantly under threat of attack by Soviet powers. Come 1965, and a majority of baby boomers are becoming adults, able to leave home and lead their own lives. However, with tensions between the US and the East growing ever higher and finally coming to a breaking point, war in Vietnam had broken out. American citizens were thrown back into conflict, with many who had lived through World War II still certain that patriotism would carry us through this conflict. What people had found in Vietnam, however, was dreadful to say the least, and many young men gave their lives for a conflict that meant nothing after all had been said and done. Men by the thousands had been entered into a lottery called the draft, which in retrospect was more akin to a government-sanctioned death sentence than anything else. In response to the draft, students engaged in large-scale protests that aimed to stop the war through non-violent means. Young adults had begun to openly rebel against the draft and risk imprisonment to spread the message that was in almost everyone's head. We need to get out. We need to send our boys home. The media, in turn, started to reflect a lot of the ideals that had been a dramatic shift from the days of the previous generation. It's no secret that some of the most iconic movies and characters of the era are wild cards who were fighting for their own ideals, like The Man with No Name in Clint Eastwood's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Men who fought for themselves and upheld their own moral standards rather than the standards of a figure of authority had been praised, without needing to demean women in order to establish their masculinity. When we discuss the differences between the greatest generation and baby boomers' social tendencies on how women and men are treated, it is important that we note that both generations were still sexist in many ways. The differences lie in how open the media was in demeaning men and women alike for behaving in certain ways. And because of the baby boomer generation's ability to celebrate manhood without being overtly sexist and overtly masculine, means that baby boomers can greatly be accredited for the first steps into a less gender discriminatory America.
Somewhere, baby, somehow